And again, I want you to concentrate on the vision and the hearing. So we're going to do the same thing with the vision. We're going to do the same thing with the hearing as we did with the vision, where we're going to kind of look at the structures so that you're familiar with all the things you have to kind of label. And then we'll come back and do one last one on our actually how we hear things and a little bit about our balance. Okay. So the first thing you want to look at when you're looking at the ears, it's going to have three major areas. So it's going to have external ear, middle ear, internal ear. Okay, and then a lot of the questions are going to come from, what do each of these areas do for us? So you want to just be clear that the external and the middle structures are going to be involved in hearing only. Okay, and then the internal ear is going to be a little different. It's going to help us with hearing, but it's also going to do this equilibrium part or the balance part for us too. Okay, so that's again a good multiple choice question. This is the picture that I want you to be pretty familiar with, and then we'll zoom in on different parts. But you just at this point you want to find the external part, you want to find the middle part, and you want to find that internal part, and just realize that sound is kind of coming in this way and kind of hitting all these structures in this particular order. So here is my external ear. It's going to consist of the auricle. It's going to consist of this external acoustic meatus. We saw that when we looked at the skull a little bit. And then we're also going to have these ceruminous glands. Okay, so here again, we just want to find all those things. Find the auricle, find the canal here, or the meatus. And then down at the bottom here, we'll see it in another picture here, is going to be our ceruminous glands or our wax glands. Okay. So now we look at what's the function of all these things, and the auricle again is elastic cartilage. We know because it's really bendable and kind of flexy, but it's a shell-shaped projection surrounding the opening of the external acoustic meatus. And again, we're just trying to funnel sounds in properly. External acoustic meatus is also known as the auditory canal. So short curved tube extending from the auricle to the eardrum. And then the ceruminous glands we already mentioned, and they're going to create our earwax for us. And then the job of them is to kind of keep foreign bodies and to repel insects from kind of crawling in your ears. Because you always see those crazy things on YouTube when you're asleep, all the things that kind of crawl around and try to get into your ears. Okay, and then for most animals, they're going to have this great big auricle here that's going to help them hear kind of way better than us. So ours is going to be a little bit smaller. And if you've ever had a golden retriever or a German shepherd or any dog like this, you can usually tell kind of how big they're going to be based on how big their ears are when they're puppies and kind of how big they're pausing, because they'll kind of grow into those two things. So now we get to the tympanic membrane. So sound waves are going to enter the external auditory meatus, and then they're going to eventually hit this tympanic membrane. We'll come back to that picture here in a second. And the tympanic membrane is also, more commonly called the eardrum. So it's going to be the boundary between the outer and the middle ears. Okay, and it's just this thin, translucent connective tissue membrane covered by skin externally. It's going to have a mucosa internally. But sound waves, when they hit this eardrum, they're going to cause it to vibrate. Okay, and then this vibration is going to transfer sound energy to the tiny bones that are going to be in the middle part of your ear, and it's going to make them sort of vibrate, and then they're going to kind of continue that process of hearing into the internal part of the ear. Okay, so here we're back to our picture again. Sound waves are coming in. They're going to hit this membrane, okay, cause it to vibrate, and then they're going to move these little bones, and then eventually that's going to move all this fluid that's in this internal part of my ear. Okay, so the middle ear is called the tympanic cavity. It's a small air-filled mucosa-lined cavity. It's going to be, again, flanked laterally by the eardrum. Medially, it's going to be flanked by this bony wall. It's going to have two openings, oval window superiorly, round window inferiorly. Those are going to come back into play when we're talking about moving the fluid in the internal part of the ear. You're also going to have this pharyngotympanic tube, or this auditory tube. It's going to connect the middle ear to your nasopharynx or to your throat. And we kind of know this because we can yawn, we can swallow to kind of open up this tube. But what it's there for is just to help you kind of drain that middle part of your ear and make sure that the pressure on either side of that tympanic membrane is going to kind of remain equal. And then again, an important thing to remember is that the eardrum can only vibrate if the pressure inside the ear is going to match the pressure on the outside of the ear. Okay, so here's our little pharyngotympanic tube. Okay, and again, we're trying to keep this from kind of filling up with fluid or anything kind of getting trapped in there so that this eardrum can kind of vibrate properly. Okay, and then most times we kind of think of this when we go on like airplanes and your ears kind of clog up, and that's because the pressure changes and now the pressure is not equal and your eardrum can't vibrate properly, and then you're going to have that kind of muffled sound. So this is where you swallow, you yawn, you try to clear your ears, you chew gum. For little kids, a lot of times if they're using a bottle or they're breastfeeding, that's going to kind of help them too. But again, the goal of this is to again equalize that pressure on either side. So the tympanic cavity is spanned by the three smallest bones in the body. Again, a good question. Okay, and these are going to be our auditory ossicles. So we're going to have a malleus, an incus, and a stapes, and they're going to be named based on what their shape is. And again, this is more stuff that we want to just make sure that we can kind of label. And then we want to know the order. What is the vibration of the tympanic membrane? What bone does it hit first? Which one kind of links up with the window? Things like that. Okay, so the handle of the malleus is secured to the eardrum. The base of the stapes is going to fit into this oval window. You have two tiny muscles that are associated with the ossicles. You're going to have this tensor tympani and this stapedius muscles. They're going to act reflexively to limit vibration and sort of minimize damage from loud noises. So it's one of those things where we have these muscles that can control the vibration of those bones just to kind of limit the sound that's kind of coming into ears. I actually have a patient who had some neurological damage to these nerves that kind of fed into these muscles. And then it's one of those interesting things where what happens to her is that she has everything sounds really, really loud to her because she just cannot control this vibration of the noises that are kind of coming in. So just not that I would make you label those, but just a cool thing to realize, this is how my body kind of controls how loud things are going to appear to me. Okay, so again, we're back to this one. And again, we just want to find the bones, right? So malleus, incus in the middle, stapes goes with the oval window, and the malleus goes with the tympanic membrane, okay? Okay, so now we get otitis media. Again, this is where things will happen kind of especially when you're younger, you'll get these middle ear infections. Usually they're going to start off as a sore throat, especially in little kids. And what happens with little kids is that tube, or the pharyngotympanic tube, is going to be shorter and it's going to run in a more horizontal direction. So gravity has a hard time kind of emptying out that middle cavity. And it's going to cause this eardrum to bulge. It's going to become inflamed. It's going to become red. And this is one because it's in the middle and you can't really get anything into that middle section. This is where we have to kind of take antibiotics to kind of treat it properly. Okay, so this is if you were doing an ear inspection. When you go to the doctor and they look into your ear, this is what they're kind of looking at, is that tympanic membrane, and they're just trying to see what that middle part kind of looks like and see if there's any sort of infection or anything going on in the middle part. So here is a picture of this fluid buildup, and again, I'm not going to be able to hear properly because I'm limiting the vibration of that tympanic membrane, and the pressure on either side is a little bit different, and therefore I will not be able to hear as well. And again, here's this eustachian tube that should be draining this, but sometimes again when you're little, it's more horizontal, and then your body has a harder time kind of draining it properly. Okay, so here's a little kid. And you can see that eustachian tube, a little more horizontal again, so gravity doesn't work as good, but it's trying to drain things kind of down into your throat. And we all sort of know as we're congested, that sometimes you'll feel those fluids kind of running down the back of your throat when you're really, really congested. So again, that's your body just trying to drain that middle part of your ear. So now we get to the inner part. So it's basically called a labyrinth, or also known as a maze. It's going to lie deep in the temporal bone behind the eye socket. Provides a secure site for our delicate receptor machinery. Okay, so it's a lot of things are going on in that temporal bone. It's going to have two major divisions. It's going to have this bony labyrinth, and it's going to have this membranous labyrinth. And we're going to see the picture here in a second, but the bony labyrinth is this system of tortuous channels, and the membranous labyrinth is just going to be this continuous series of these sort of membranous sacs and ducts that are inside this bony labyrinth. Okay, so it's not super, super complicated. You just want to think about the bony labyrinth is the tortuous channels, and the membranous labyrinth is kind of what's inside those tortuous channels. So here's a picture of our tortuous channels here, or labyrinth. And I can see I have the bony part, and then I have the membranous part. And again, these are going to be kind of filled up with fluids. And here's a picture of these structures within the temporal bone, because we always want to think about, okay, where are these actually located? But they're housed inside your skull, and obviously we're going to keep them very, very, very protected, okay? So now we get to the fluids of the internal ear. So your bony labyrinth is filled up with perilymph. Your membranous labyrinth is filled up with endolymph, and then these two fluids are going to conduct the sound vibrations involved in hearing, because again, we're trying to sort of vibrate those bones, push these fluids around inside the ear, and then again, we can create these impulses and send that info kind of up to the brain, okay? So they're going to conduct sound vibrations involved in hearing, and they're also going to respond to mechanical forces or changes in body position and acceleration. So this is the equilibrium part, okay? So hearing, equilibrium part. So the bony labyrinth has three regions, has a vestibule, has the semicircular canals, has the cochlea. We want to be able to label them, and then we want to know kind of just what receptors are in each one and sort of what the function of each of these ones is going to be. And the cochlea one is going to be more our hearing, okay? So again, we want to find these. So here is our vestibule. Here is our semicircular canals, and then here is our cochlea. And again, you can see we have different receptors kind of in each one of these to sort of pay attention and sort of respond to different types of stimuli. So 3 regions of the bony labyrinth, and here's the important part for the multiple choice. You have your vestibule. It's going to respond to the pull of gravity, and it's going to report changes in head position. Okay, but this is usually in a straight line, and that's the biggest difference between the vestibule and the semicircular canal, is that the vestibule is going to be straight line stuff, and the semicircular canals, which is nice because it has that circle in there, they're going to report rotational head movements. Okay, so those are, again, very, very good multiple choice questions. Your cochlea, again, is going to be more my hearing. Okay, and it's going to have these 3 chambers. Scale vestibuli starts at the oval window. Scale media is going to be the actual cochlear duct, and then the scale tympani is going to be the part that kind of terminates at the round window. And again, we just want to find these on the little picture here in a second. So my cochlear duct is going to be the part, again, that's going to house the receptor organ for hearing, which is going to be called the spiral organ. Everything in your hearing and in your ears is going to come down to these little hair cells. Okay, so the spiral organ is composed of supporting cells and then receptor cells, which are going to be these cochlear hair cells, and we'll see those in a second here. But what you're basically doing is you're attaching this nerve to these hair cells, and when you bend that nerve or you sort of bend those hairs, we're going to create these impulses, and then we can send those up to the brain. Okay, so here is a picture of our scale vestibuli. Okay, and then we have the cochlear duct here, and then on the other side you have the scale tympani. So we're vibrating the tympanic membrane, moving the bones, pushing this fluid through these little vestibuli. Okay, and if it's a proper frequency, it's going to actually pass through the cochlear duct, stimulate those hairs, and then we're going to actually be able to kind of hear things. And then here's a picture of the vestibuli again. Okay, and you can see that we have a nerve sort of attached at the bottom of here, and then that nerve is going to go up to this little spiral organ and that hair in the cochlear duct. Okay, so here's a little zoomed in picture of my spiral ganglion and my nerve kind of going to that cochlear duct. And again, I would have some hairs in there that again are going to be sort of moved and sort of stimulated when that fluid is passing through there at the proper frequency. Okay, so again, we have another zoomed in picture, and in this one I really just get to see these kind of hairs that are kind of located within that spiral organ. And then here is a real picture, which is really, really cool, of just what it would actually look like if you were looking at it kind of under a microscope. Okay, so we get a little kind of summary of the internal ear, and again, I want to make sure I can kind of label everything, know what the function of all these things are, and then I want to be able to kind of come back and see, how do they help me with my equilibrium and how do they help me with my hearing. Okay, and that's what we're going to do in part 2 of our hearing audio lectures.